from the road this week, but wanted to tell you all how Brittany and I bought our first owner-occupied duplex. This was our second house hack. If you haven't watched the first, I talk about that in one of our other videos, how we house hacked a single-family house. We moved out of that and into a duplex. And so this video, I'm going to go over what we looked for in that deal, also some details on what we paid for it, and some tips and tricks that we learned while living there. Stay tuned. All right, so what we looked for in the deal. Like I mentioned about our single family house, the first thing that we were primarily focused on was location. We had to find a location that was still gonna be good and safe and all those nice things for Brittany and I to live in and potentially start a family in. So location was number one. We found this duplex about 10 minutes south of Green Bay in a suburb called De Pere. So that was perfect for us. That was then followed by the size. Again, we needed it big enough to feel comfortable. We wanted a yard. This place had a really nice, perfect setup where we could split it right down the backyard with a fence. Again, it's privacy for you, it's privacy for your tenants, and that's what we really valued there. We were also looking for something like, again, 2-bed, maybe 1.5 bath, something like that. The other important criteria was that we were strictly looking for a side-by-side duplex. Now, this is something that after looking at multiple different types of multifamily properties that I finally just honed in on, because I think it's the perfect combination between, privacy, if you're trying to owner occupy this place, and having a tenant that helps pay the mortgage. I didn't want anything, if I could help it, that was more of like an up-down 2-family or anything like that. So that was very important. I also wanted split utilities. So this was very important because there are several properties that might share water or a central heating system or something like that. So that was a huge one. It was separate water. Each place also needed to have its own separate furnace and electrical meters, obviously, but that one's almost always the case. So those were the big ones that we looked for in a property. The next is the numbers. So the numbers were very important. What we were looking for is to at least meet the 1% rule, which means that 1% of the purchase price should be about the monthly income that you get from both units. So we bought this place for $162,000, which was a great price, because I knew that rents could surpass that. This place was split down the middle. It was a 3-bed, 2-bath on one side and a 2-bed, 2-bath on the other side. We lived in the smaller side. Between those two, I know I could immediately get that above that 1% rule after we moved out. Now while we lived there, obviously we weren't going to be meeting that. But what we could do is start to run the numbers on how much we would pay while we were living there, and have that factor in directly into our budget. So again, $162,000. We put 15% down. This is a benefit that you get as an owner-occupant of a duplex. You don't have to put 20 or 25% down. That combined with that mortgage, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance equaled out to be, in our case, about $1,075. We amortized that over 30 years. And that's what our payment ended up being. That minus what we knew we could get for rent on the 3-bed, 2-bath side was already occupied when we moved in, but those guys soon moved out, just decided to buy their own house. And shortly thereafter, I was able to rent that place for about $1,100 a month. So immediately we were living for free, plus putting a little extra money in our pocket. But again, this was such a good deal because after we moved out then, we could rent both sides of this duplex and far surpass that 1% rule. So after we moved out, we rented our spot for about $1,000. That entire duplex is bringing in $2,000, $2,100 in gross rents with a mortgage of only about $1,100, cash flowing over $1,000. That's awesome. Okay, last thing is what we learned while living in this owner-occupied duplex. The first thing, and it became immediately apparent, was make it clear to your tenant that's living next door that it's not okay to come knock on the door with an issue, just to drop by, things like that. It will drive you nuts. Make it clear to them from the start. This was a big mistake on my end, and I actually didn't help things by doing something similar in return. When I went to knock on their door to communicate something, if there's nothing else from this video that you pick up on, or that you learned from, take this one from me. Make it clear to your tenant. Text, phone calls, emails, okay. Knocking on the door, not okay. Another thing that I learned is that immediately when you get settled in your new duplex, you want to get that tenant next door on a new lease. So you have no idea what conditions or anything like that, what deals they worked out with the previous landlord. So you're gonna want to get that tenant on your lease as soon as possible, and you might have to wait a little bit until their lease is at a point where you can make changes and things like that. So you still have to honor everything like that, but as soon as possible, get that tenant on your lease with your conditions and make sure that they understand your house rules. The next thing, and this isn't unique to owner-occupied a duplex, but it still applies, is go around and with that new tenant next door, get a list of everything that they believe needs to be updated or corrected, maybe stuff that the previous landlord neglected, and take care of it for them. Sure, there's limits to stuff like that, but in general, what I found is that, doing this a couple times now, is that it's usually pretty minor stuff. Maybe the blinds or something like that are cracked or broken. At that point, maybe it was their fault, maybe it wasn't, but it's an act of good faith, and I think it puts you on really good terms and shows that care about the property, that you understand and aren't trying to disrupt their living conditions and actually improve them. Because coming from their angle, there's probably a lot of uncertainty. You put their mind at ease, and you show an act of good faith and go around with them to address any of those little pesky things that are happening in their unit. I think that was a huge factor that got me off to on the right start with the tenants next door when I moved in. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something from this video, or at the very least, got some inspiration to go and owner-occupy your own duplex. If I can answer any more questions for you guys, please leave them below in the comments. I'd be happy to respond and give you any information that I have on my experience, and hopefully give you some tools to apply to your situation. Brittany and I actually moved out of this duplex and into another owner-occupied duplex. So maybe I'll do a video on that next to give you guys some more information and just maybe prove to you more how much I believe in this stuff. So we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Welcome to Green Bay with another amazing flight. We Please remain seated with the seatbelt securely fastened and carry-on items stowed until the aircraft has